Let's move on to the happenings in Washington, D.C. Now, I'm sure that you guys were paying attention to this last week when the Leonard Leo Supreme Court ruled in favor of a Tennessee law that bans gender-affirming care for trans kids in their state. Many liberals and progressives wondered, well, how low can they go? And what will they do next to be cruel to regular people in this country? Well, now we know. On Monday, the Leonard Leo 6 freed the Trump administration, the regime as we call it, to deport migrants to countries that they did not come from, have never been to, have never set foot in, and have known nothing about. They lifted a court order that had required that immigrants at least get a chance to challenge their deportations. So the regime is now free to send migrants, again, without hearings, to as far away as Honduras, Libya, South Sudan, a nation on the brink of a violent civil war, by the way. Countries that they're presumably paying to take these people and throw them into their prisons, the way the regime is currently paying El Salvador by its autocratic leader, Nayib Bukele, who calls himself the world's coolest dictator. In a scathing 19-page dissent that was joined by Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson and Justice Elena Kagan, Justice Sonia Sotomayor just literally ruined and laid waste to the right-wing majority, saying that she could not in good conscience join, quote, so gross an abuse of the court's discretion, and writing that the court majority's action exposes thousands to the risk of torture and death and gives the Trump administration a win despite earlier violating the lower court's order. I'm going to put up a piece of her dissent. It says the following, quote, the government has made clear in word and deed that it feels itself unconstrained by law, free to deport anyone, anywhere, without notice or an opportunity to be heard. She closed her dissent this way. The Due Process Clause represents the principle that ours is a government of laws, not of men, and that we submit ourselves to rulers only if under rules. By rewarding lawlessness, the court once again undermines that fundamental principle. Apparently, the court finds the idea that thousands will suffer violence in far-flung locales more palatable than the remote possibility that a district court exceeded its remedial powers when it ordered the government to provide notice and process to which the plaintiffs are constitutionally and statutorily entitled. That use of discretion is as incomprehensible as it is inexcusable. Respectfully, but regretfully, I dissent. And I want to note for you now that the right-wing majority, led by Chief Justice John Roberts, they didn't even bother to justify their decision in writing. Joining me now is Leah Litman, author of the recent New York Times bestseller, Lawless: How the Supreme Court Runs on Conservative Grievance, Fringe Theories, and Bad Vibes. We're going to put a picture of that up on your screen so you can know what that looks like, so you can pick it up for yourself. We're also joined by the great Elie Mystal, author of the also New York Times best-selling book, Bad Law, 10 Popular Laws That Are Ruining America. We're just teaming with bestsellers on this show. We got a lot of bestsellers. We're going to put up their pictures so you can see them. Thank you both for being here. I want to also know that Elie is the guy who I asked him to do it, and he did it. Put a portion of, I believe, a Sotomayor dissent to the ether beat for the people. There's Lawless. Hey, y'all, thanks for being here. I want to start, Leah. I want to go back to you first, because the last time you were on, it was the day that the Supreme Court did that ruling on care for trans kids. And you had some thoughts about the Amy Coney Barrett angle of it. So I want to let you share that.
Yes. So what we were talking about is after the Chief Justice's majority opinion upheld the ban on gender-affirming care for trans youth, reasoning that it didn't actually discriminate on the basis of sex or discriminate on the basis of gender identity, two ridiculous conclusions. Justice Barrett wrote separately to say, well, but even if it did discriminate against trans youth, I would be okay with that, and I would still treat that law as presumptively unconstitutional. It was completely gratuitous and unnecessary. The Chief Justice had already upheld the law on more narrow reasoning, and yet she still felt compelled to say, oh, and by the way, I think discrimination against the trans community would be perfectly fine, basically inviting states to do more of it.
Yeah, well, I mean, she's a handmaid in her religious belief system. Shocker. And all of the people who have been writing hot takes in the mainstream media saying that, oh my God, she's suitoring, she's becoming this moderate. Yeah. Wait to see what she does before you start, suiting her up with a superwoman suit. Elie Mystal, let's talk about this new ruling. The idea that you would take somebody who's from Cuba and send them to South Sudan, a country that may soon be enmeshed in a civil war, and so they can be locked in a wartime prison, it seems barbaric even for MAGA, but here we are. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it's very bad right now. The thing that I want people to understand is that the way the Trump administration is doing this and what the Supreme Court is allowing them to do is to find a loophole in a treaty, an international human rights treaty called the Convention Against Torture. And just in case there are any young people, any young lawyers out there listening, if your boss asks you to find a loophole in a treaty called the Convention Against Torture, you're working for the bad guys. That's a good time to quit, right? Because we should not be finding loopholes in the Anti-Torture Convention. But in any event, the loophole is if the government wants to send you away, wants to send you out of this country, and a judge determines that it cannot send you back to your home country because it is too dangerous in your home country, right? Because you literally have proven to the judge that you will be tortured or killed or in some way brutalized if you're sent back to your home country. Then the government is allowed to suggest other countries to send you to, right? But according to the convention, those countries have to be countries that aren't going to torture and brutalize and kill you, right? The loophole is that if you've gone through the entire process, apparently, according to the Supreme Court, if you've gone through the entire process and the judge says, okay, you can't send them to this country or that country, if the government later then says, okay, we're going to send you to a country that wasn't even on our initial list, that's okay. So, like, you completely circumvent the Convention Against Torture by sending somebody to a country that wasn't on the country that you initially said you were going to send them to, and that country can do torture. And that is what Trump is doing. He is sending people to places like South Sudan after not giving them a hearing on whether or not South Sudan is safe for them. And the Supreme Court said, yeah, that's cool. Yeah, that's fine. Let's get around the Convention Against Torture.
It's so sick. It seems to me that this all stems from the Trump Stephen Miller conspiracy theory, which he actually tried to use on New York. He said the reason that that Mamdani won the election is because of the conspiracy by Democrats to import unlimited migrants to America, as if New York has not always been an immigrant-rich city. Suddenly, they've conspired to bring in the brown baddies, to put the other brown Muslim baddie in office. But there is a fundamental conspiracy theory at the heart of the immigration policy of this administration, and it is called white replacement theory. It's something that Tucker Carlson used to pitch before he switched against Ted Cruz and became rational. And it's this idea that Democrats, somehow led by George Soros, who apparently rules them, is attempting to import brown, black, Muslim, any non-white immigrants that they can scoop up around the world in order to drown America in non-Republican voters, so that Republicans can't win elections because all the baddie brown people vote Democratic because they think they're going to get free welfare. And that is the theory. And it is a fascist theory in the sense that it is strictly racial. You know, they talk about the other side playing the race card, and this is the race card. This is absolute identity politics. They're saying the country is becoming less white, and that is a conspiracy. Can you talk a little bit about why it is that the supposed learned lawyers of the Supreme Court seem to believe this theory too, because they seem to be acting on it in their rulings?
Well, I would say that there are a couple of reasons. First of all, Samuel Alito's brain has curdled. I mean, like, Samuel Alito is no longer a rational human. I believe he is the kind of person that truly is sitting around every day watching Fox News just like everybody else. And so he 100% buys in to the white replacement theory. I would argue that Kavanaugh does too. I mean, like, you know, he's drinking his beers, he's watching Fox, like, it makes sense to him. So, like, there are a couple of Republican justices who are on that side. On the other side, you have the Republican justices, and Leah can speak to this more clearly than I can. But you have these Republican justices who basically act like anytime the president says national security, that gives him a free pass to do whatever he wants. Like, literally all he has to do is click his heels 3 times and say national security, and then the Constitution is moot. The Constitution can be thrown out of the window. That's generally how Roberts likes to play it. As long as it's a Republican president saying national security, Roberts will apparently let the president do anything. And that is the other way we get into white replacement theory. So if the president says, if the white supremacist president says, oh, we've got replacement theory going on, John Roberts is like, well, I have this constitution, but what can you do? The president said so.
Yeah. Leah, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think we should understand what the Supreme Court and the Republican justices are doing is basically a project of animus laundering, where they are willing to launder the animus of the Trump administration into the language of the law and tell the Trump administration basically just lie better and we'll let you get away with it. This is the lesson the Trump administration learned from the first travel ban. After all, the president immediately fired off a Muslim ban that was obviously ridden with animus. And then after lower courts invalidated it, they do a slightly revised version that they say, oh, we're going through some magic intergovernmental process that just somehow produced another Muslim ban. And the Supreme Court let them partially implement it. And then they let them finally implement the third and final version of the Muslim ban, basically saying, well, the government kind of tried hard enough and went through enough motions in order to, again, cleanse this still animus-laden Muslim ban of its origins and anti-Muslim animus. And so I think that is the lesson that the Republican justices have taught the Trump administration. And so the Trump administration now thinks we can get away with this.
Yeah, I would just add really quickly, in my book, I talk about how the Immigration and Nationalization Act, our kind of fundamental immigration law, was passed based on the science of a Nazi eugenicist, like an American guy that we then exported to Nazi Germany to teach them how to do eugenics like we were doing it here in the States. So like our entire immigration system is really based on racism. Like that is its beating heart. And so it's not all that surprising that the justices go in for it.
We're having some gremlins that have knocked Leah Litman off, and I want to stay with you for a minute, Elie, while we try to restore her connection. Because my understanding of the Alien Exclusion Acts, of the acts that were passed in the early 20th century, which Stephen Miller absolutely loves and wants to restore, even though he would probably not have made it into the country based on them, because his family actually were Jewish refugees from Europe, but he apparently wouldn't maybe even let his own family in at this point, and especially if they tanned, wouldn't be able to get in at all. Was based on the idea that the 1890 census had a certain percentage of white people and non-white people, and the goal of immigration was thought to be to preserve that same mix.
Yes.
That we could never allow the country to become less white than it was in 1890. Is that true, Elie?
My read of history is like yours. It is the white folks got to a number where they felt like they could still maintain control over this country via their whiteness, and they've been trying basically to keep the quota, the ratio of whites to non-whites in this country, the same ever since about the 1890s. And we've seen it's not just the 1890 census. We call the 1920 census the Lawless census, because that was the census that really showed the massive influx of immigrants to the country, the massive redistribution of people from rural areas to the cities. And that is the only census, the 1920 census, where we just didn't reapportion. We just threw it away. We just literally acted like it didn't exist. And when we came back in 1930, the switch that we did was that we changed how many people were allowed to be in Congress, right? Most of your listeners know we have 435 Congress people, but a lot of people don't know it wasn't always that 435. In fact, every census, every time we added population, we would add Congress people, right? So to keep the level of representation basically standard, no matter how many people we had. But after the 1920 census showed the power of the cities growing, we cut it off, and we instead limited the number of Congress people to 435. That's where we've been since 1929, without increasing representation, which is one of the reasons why America right now is the least representative democracy among major democratic powers, right? Like our ratio of Congress people to citizens is the highest in the developed world because of the racism inherent in things like in the things that we're talking about.
I mean, it's even why we have two Dakotas. Like, I mean, they literally like, we'll just apportion it out so that there'll be two Dakota senators. There'll be 4 senators from the one thing that was the Dakota. They made it 2 of them. They're like, we'll just get 2. Why is there a Wyoming? There are less people in Wyoming than there are in Washington, D.C. Why do they get a whole state? It doesn't make sense, because it gives them 2 more senators. It gives them more power. I apologize to Leah. Maybe if we can bring her back another time, but we're just not going to be able to make it work. So I'm going to stay with you, Elie, on this. I mean, it seems to me that their fundamental goal is to create an American monarch. They just want that monarch to be a Republican. They're consistent. If you go back to Bush v. Gore, where they were essentially saying we set aside even the counting of votes and we will just keep on, nickeling and diming this thing until we get to a George W. Bush presidency. We'll do it however we have to do it. And then you get to Donald Trump and they do the same thing. They say, well, we know Article 3 exists in the 14th Amendment. And we know it says you can't be an insurrectionist, but, a 12-year-old can't get on the ballot. If a state says you're 12, you can't run for president, they can knock that person off. But if a state says you're an insurrectionist, you can't be on the ballot, they're like, yeah, no, not if it's Donald Trump. And it does feel like the whole goal. And I feel like Sonia Sotomayor was kind of screaming that in her Trump v. United States dissent, where she was saying, y'all are trying to make this man a king. Look, am I hysterical for thinking that?
So like I said, they all worked for, most of them worked for Bush v. Gore. But it's also a question of where they find it easier to execute power as a Republican, right? They love the court because the court is not elected and the court can do horribly unpopular things that conservatives want without having to answer to the people, right? The president, while an elected official, is able to wield power, again, without direct connections to the people more often than not, right? You've got a long term, you've got serious military powers. As I said, you can always say national security and get a lot done that way. We see Trump using executive orders a lot of time. That's a much easier way for Republicans to wield power than Congress, than through the strictures of the people. And we see this working in real time, right? Because we see how difficult it's been for the Trump Republicans to pass his big, beautiful death panel bill, even though his party controls both houses of Congress, right? So even with Congress, even with the Senate, even with the Democrats being so kind of feckless that they can't filibuster effectively most of the Republican ideas, they still can't pass the bill, right? And that's because their ideas, Trump's ideas, are extremely unpopular. But the court understands that most of their ideas are extremely unpopular. And so they prefer to have power in the courts. And when the power can't only be done by the courts, they prefer to have the power in the presidency because those are the most inculcated from the will of the people. So it's how they win. Democrats, by contrast, understand that their ideas are popular. If they could only kind of get out of their own way, their ideas are winning ideas.
Let's talk a little bit about war powers, because I've heard a lot of people try to say that Donald Trump, and I don't know, I feel like the whole we should impeach Trump because he bombed Iran. It's so exhausting for people to still be talking about impeachment. Impeachment is ineffective without the ability to convict. And the United States has impeached multiple presidents, but has never convicted a single one. Andrew Johnson didn't get convicted. He was acquitted, I think, by one vote. They attempted to impeach Bill Clinton. That didn't work. He was not convicted. Richard Nixon never even got impeached. He resigned before they could impeach him. And Trump was impeached twice, not convicted. The whole impeachment thing is, I was very much for Trump being impeached both times. But unless you can have Republican senators, to be honest, who have the courage to convict, and we just don't. They don't exist. They are simpering saps who are just going to take the knee to Trump. They will back down from the one thing they could do to write themselves better in the annals of history. They won't do it. So I don't want to talk about impeachment. But there is a question right now about war powers and whether or not presidents, and not just Trump, should be legally able to bomb other countries without Congress giving them authorization. Is there anything in the law that speaks to this? Because presidents, they all do it.
Yeah, there is, right? Technically, it is Congress that is allowed to declare war, not the president, because we don't live in a monarchy, right? But that's on paper. In practice, and this has happened throughout multiple administrations with multiple presidents from both parties and multiple Congresses controlled by both parties, Congress has ceded its power. And this is like, I think, a big think 3,000 foot point, 30,000 foot point about like why we're in this point that we are as a country. Over the past 30 or 40 years, Congress has repeatedly ceded power, ceded specifically the war powers to the president, because whenever the president starts saying, let's go to war, their poll numbers go up, Congress people are afraid of opposing a president on the war path for reasons that I can't fully understand. We are a violent country, and so being tough and strong on war plays well, polls well with the people. And so Congress has repeatedly ceded its right, its ability to constrain a president who wants to start a war. So now when you start to try to claw back the power that Congress already gave away, it's really hard to do, right? So much of this starts with Kennedy and Johnson and Nixon in Vietnam, right? And the idea that Vietnam was not a declared war. And so that was a way for Congress, by not declaring it a war, Congress, well, what can we do? It's not a declared war. The president can take military actions without declaring war. Okay, they kind of made that up for the Vietnam special, right? But it allowed Congress to escape accountability for our disaster in Vietnam and put it all on the presidents, right? Put it all on LBJ, put it all on Nixon, and Vietnam killed LBJ, right? Like, just absolutely destroyed him, right? And so that's why when we go now, fast forward to Desert Storm, whatever thing we're doing, fast forward to all of our wars for oil, fast forward to Afghanistan, fast forward to Iraq and Yellow Cake and Colin Powell lying to everybody. All of it then redounds back to the president, and Congress gets to pretend like it has nothing to do with it. Well, now Congress basically has nothing to do with it because they gave the powers away. You're asking, could Congress claw it back? Yes, absolutely. A strong, idealistic Congress could tell the president, no, you cannot do this. That is a legal thing that is in our system of government. But I see nothing from Congress that suggests they have the will or the desire to claw that party back. As I honestly believe that Congress is, at this point, they're just there for the parking spaces. They like being told they're congressmen. They're not there to actually wield the power of the American Congress.
Well, and I have to say, and I will agree with you that the Congress no longer essentially exists. We essentially have a Duma in the United States. There are some dissenting members. You have a few people who speak out, but the Congress, to me, in the U.S. is really not that much different than the Knesset in Israel, which kind of just rubber stamps whatever their prime minister wants to do. The Duma in Russia, which just rubber stamps it. There's sort of the appearance that we have a representative government, but you don't, unless you have like a Tip O'Neill that is so full of hubris that he believes himself to be, the leader of the free world, or a Nancy Pelosi who is just so strong that she is going to insist on the power of the speakership. Those are the kind of speakers who actually stand up to presidents. We don't have that anymore. And the only thing I would differ with what you said, Elie, is I don't even think it was Vietnam. If you think about it, the last declared war we had was World War II. And after that, we have gone to quote unquote war, or at least made war on Korea, which has resulted in North Korea looking at Japan getting nuked and being like, "Ooh, we need nukes." Now they have nukes too, and they're still in a soft war with South Korea. We have done actions not just in Iraq twice, once to take our oil, because make sure that we had access to the oil we think is ours in Kuwait. But you go back to the 1950s, Eisenhower, the same president who said the military industrial complex will destroy us all when he left office, earlier in his career, allowed the CIA to essentially make war on Iran, on Chile, on the Democratic Republic of Congo, killing Patrice Lumumba, their democratically elected leader.
We're not even talking about all the Ronald Reagan stuff in South America.
Right, all throughout South America. We were destabilizing and overthrowing governments at will. And the idea of the arrogance of the United States to literally do acts of war. We were bombing Cambodia. We didn't have a war against Cambodia, but we were bombing them, right? I mean, you think about Libya. Okay, maybe people didn't like Muammar Gaddafi, but wow, we went and put a drone up and killed him. You know what I mean? Like, do we get to do that? Do we get to decide who gets to live and die in other countries?
What?
You don't like their politics. You don't like something about them, or maybe they've done something in the past. The other day, Elie, I have to bring you into this. Last night on CNN, I was on with my friend Abby Phillip, and someone said that our bombing of Iran, one of the gentlemen that was on the set with me, said that this was about the Iran hostage crisis and the various acts of terror by Hezbollah and Iran proxy in the 80s. I've never heard of delayed action warfare. So essentially, they take our hostages in the 70s and we bomb them in 2025. Does that even make sense?
No.
Is there a War Powers Act for that?
No.
For delayed response retaliation?
No, they're making it up as they go along. They're making it up again because they understand Trump's poll numbers were tanking. He can't pass his bill. His actions are unpopular. He's deploying troops on the streets of Los Angeles. So let's have a war. Let's have some bombing that always tends to get people to rally around the flag. Joy, I've argued, and I don't say this lightly, but our country needs to be sanctioned. We are the bad guys on the world stage. We are a menace to not only free people everywhere, but we are a menace to peaceful people everywhere at this point. And I'm not even going to say that we've only been a menace for the past 3 or 4 months, right? Like, when does the international community decide that enough is enough? I know we're rich. I know we've got a lot of money. I know that people want to buy things from our country because we're rich, or want to sell things to our country because we're rich. But at some point, the international community has to stand up to us because we are a bad guy on the world stage, right? And so we should be sanctioned. We should be sanctioned and rebuked for these illegal, unnecessary bombings in Iran in a conflict that does not involve us, right? Like, we have to be stopped through the same kind of means that that our country and others have used to rebuke a North Korea or a China or name a rogue state. We are the rogue state, and other countries need to start treating us like that.
Elie Mystal, always such a shy and retiring figure who never tells us what he thinks or feels. We have to drag it out of him every single time. Elie Mystal, my friend, thank you very much. Much appreciated. Enjoy the rest of your night. Thank you.
Nice talking to you.
Cheers. And I want to thank Leah Litman once again. And we are so sorry about not being able to get your connection to work, Leah. We owe you a repeat. We'll bring you back on because we love hearing what you have to say. Your book is brilliant. Her book is called Lawless. Elie's book is called Bad Law. Both of these are New York Times best-selling